Hi, everyone. I'm Yolana Ridge. Thank you for your patience.
So sorry to stop you again, Yolanda.
Okay. It says webinar is now streaming live on Facebook.
Oh, okay. My bad.
That's okay. Hello again. So we are a team of scientists and publicists and smart people, and we were almost defeated by Facebook, but we persevered and here we are. So I am Yolana Ridge, and I am here to talk about my book, CRISPR, which is aimed at teen readers, kind of ages 14 to 18, but is designed to provide a good introduction to genes and gene editing and the different ways in which gene editing with CRISPR can be used to change everything from people to the food we eat to the animals that went extinct a long time ago. And I am here with my new friend, Dr. Mark Poznansky, and he's here to talk about his book, Saved by Science. And I will, there we go, and I will let him tell you what it's about and introduce himself.
Well, this is great. I think we make a good partnership team, Yolanda, even though you're about 4,000 kilometers away. Yeah. My book's it's about synthetic biology, the hope and promise of synthetic biology. And I believe that science will actually save our souls in terms of our health, in terms of the food we eat, and in terms of cleaning up our environment, which is in such dire straits. So I have great hope.
You do have a lot of hope. I loved your book. I loved reading your book. One of the things I think you did so well is you painted a fairly bleak picture of the state in which things are at, like especially what you call the big three, which I love: food, health, and climate. And you paint a pretty dire picture because we are in a pretty dire situation, but then you leave the reader with so much hope, mostly based in synthetic biology. But I wanted to ask you, like, how did you strike that balance? Was that something you were thinking about as you wrote, or is that just how you feel about it?
Well, I think my personality is one of great hope and promise. And yet when I look around the world, especially, with CNN and American politics and COVID-19, it's pretty depressing. So there is doom and gloom, and I think people have to understand that because we have to take action. But I'm incredibly hopeful that there are actions to be taken. Some of them are going to be pretty severe, as in climate change. I mean, we are going to have to stop burning fossil fuels. That's going to be very hurtful to a lot of people. But I'm very positive. I think there are solutions.
Yeah, well, and one of the things that you present is alternative solutions, because, I mean, especially with climate change, we all know we have to stop burning fossil fuels, but it's obviously a lot harder than, than it should be, or else we would have done it by now. But you talk a lot about how we could use gene editing and synthetic cells to try to sort of clean it up and even provide different sources of energy.
Sure.
Which I love, which I didn't touch on in my book. And as I read, I was like, this is great, that people need to know about this. What audience were you targeting when you wrote the book?
So initially I was targeting people who think and they're concerned about the future. 2, they read, okay? Mm-hmm. And 3, they don't have a science background. And really, when I'm writing, and I'm writing several other books now in similar areas, I'm thinking about that 25 to 30-year-old who maybe is a little depressed about the future, and I'm trying to convey to them that there are tremendous answers and solutions from science. Very different areas of science. I happen to take on synthetic biology, but that's certainly not the only one.
Yeah, it's so important that it's not just the scientists that understand science, isn't it?
That's right. But having just met you yesterday, I came up with the idea, with the issue of maybe you and I are targeting the wrong audience. You're going after the very young, or the teenagers, young teenagers, and I'm thinking about that 25-year-old. But the people who are going to be making decisions over the next couple of years are in their 40s and 50s. And some of those decisions, as in stopping to burn fossil fuels, are going to be massive. And how are we going to educate them?
Yeah, it's an interesting point, because one of the points that I make in my book is that right now all the decisions are being made, you know, in labs, but in higher government, like, I don't know, enclaves. Like, there's very small groups of people that are making this decision, and it has such huge potential ramifications for all of us. And the one thing you talked about in your book, which was really good, was about false information getting out there. And I think that there is quite a bit of false information, and how easy it is for society to grasp onto like the false information and not be able to kind of sort through things and find where is the accurate information and what's the easy news bit, you know?
So actually, if you look at it, if you think about the fact that 50% of Americans and Canadians have questioned whether they would take a vaccine for COVID-19, you say that's appalling, and you say, well, you know, you blame the conspiracy theorists, but you know what? I think I'm to blame as a scientist. I think scientists have to take much more responsibility, and the politicians and the companies that are supporting the science. So it's you can't, you know, you have to take responsibility.
Well, I think you've taken a pretty big step in this book. And as to your question about how we target 40 or 50-year-olds, I mean, I think that this book really does. I hope that, like you said, it's not just 40 and 50-year-olds that are already interested in this topic, but maybe 40 or 50-year-olds that like hear about CRISPR and go, whoa, that's just way over my head. Because I think both of our books make it quite accessible.
For sure. And you know, in my case, talking about synthetic biology, I mean, I love the notion of thinking that these little silly microbes, these tiny single cells, I mean, they have undergone virtually all the insults that humans have in terms of starvation and excess and hot and cold and radiation, and they've found solutions. And I think we can learn from those solutions. For example, there are microbes that can resist ionizing radiation. Can we use that gene or that genetics or that protein to do the same for us? Should we need it?
Yeah, I love when you say about how like we can learn from millions of years or more of evolution from microbes, right? We don't have access to that ourselves, so we can learn from them. Yeah,
I mean, it is mind-boggling, but you have to explain that. I mean, the fact is that we're pretty young. You know, we're you know, 250,000 years old, and microbes, there's some have been around for 3 and 4 billion years, and they've seen a lot more than we have, and they share a tremendous amount of our genetic material. So you gotta have your audience get their head around the notion that these are smart little things.
Absolutely, yeah. And how do you think that the general population needs to understand the specific science behind all of these things, or do you think it's more important that they understand the application and how it can be used both good and bad, I suppose?
Well, I think you've done a pretty good job in explaining a lot of these ideas, and the notion that the population has to simply trust the scientist and hear the applications. I think that's not acceptable anymore. So there has to be a modicum of understanding of what the science is all about, and you and I and scientists have to take that on as part of our jobs. I think that's very important.
One of the things you mentioned in our correspondence was like 20 years ago when they introduced the idea of gene therapy. You know, people said, well, can I make my child super tall and guarantee that my child will go into the NBA? And it was just so funny that you said that, because it's actually more than 20 years ago now. But I did a thesis paper on gene therapy more than 20 years ago. And at the time, it was so promising. It was going to do all of these things. But truly, we couldn't even get it to cure a fairly simple genetic disorder, never mind make your kid into a superstar, right? But do you get that question from people when you say that that's the kind of thing you're
So
studying?
I had a very inferior interview with CBC a couple of weeks ago because the interviewer only wanted to talk about the Chinese scientist who was apparently in jail, who did the CRISPR gene editing on a child. That's all she wanted to talk about. And my answer is, there's bad stuff going around. There's thieves and frauds around, and they're always going to do bad things, but we have to make sure that we have a way to police them. And quite frankly, if they do bad things, put them in jail, but still the ethics that I asked about, why can't I have, genetically modify my child to be 6'10" and play for the Toronto Raptors? And I think the answer is you have to set limits around the technologies that are understood by the population.
Yeah, I agree 100%. You both of our books talk about regulation. And I think that's why we need more people to be literate and understand this so that we can get a lot of people involved in making regulations that hopefully we can all live by.
Yeah, but our governments are not good at that. I mean, I have a saying that I used to use that technology leapfrogs policy. And you really do have situations where the government gets so mired down in trying to figure out what to do that the scientists and the corporations simply find a way around it. That's not acceptable. So we have to have regulators, i.e. government, or maybe not government, who are much more nimble and are in front and not always way behind.
So interesting, because you mentioned a book in yours that I'm going to order. It's about the acceleration. You can say the author's name.
So it's Thomas Friedman, the famous editor and journalist from the New York Times. The title of the book is Thank You for Being Late. I won't explain why it's that, but the notion is that we're living in that, that hockey stick period where things are going up really, really, really quickly. And sometimes we don't have time to think, but nevertheless, we have to understand that those things are occurring, and it's driven by the digital age. But now we have the genomic age and all sorts of new things occurring, and they're coming quickly, not like they were in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah, exactly. So to your point, like having the regulators and people be able to keep up with this and make smart decisions, it's tough to get everyone on board.
Yeah, but we're going to be in trouble if we don't do that. We'll either be laggards, and all the cool stuff will be developed by nations who have figured it out, or do it illegally, which would be terrible. But we certainly have to have regulatory feeling in Canada that is very progressive, and we don't have that yet.
Yeah, interesting case in point about how fast things move, because when I was writing, and I have a feeling the timeline for your writing and publishing was quite similar to mine. And the case of the babies that were gene edited to be resistant to HIV was in the news when I was writing. It was everywhere. Now it's basically gone, and he is in jail, which is good, but it's gone. And I think we both managed to mention a few bits about COVID-19 in our books just before it went to press, right? So the news cycle has totally changed, and so has the applications of synthetic biology and gene editing, in terms of what's important.
I want to say something, really positive about COVID-19, because if you think about it, I mean, this started well under a year ago that we really got geared up. And there are 4 vaccines that are almost there. And we'll know in January, and we'll probably be able to get 1 or 2 or 3 of them in March. Never have things happened so quickly. And the technology, some of them are actually synthetic biology, will be applied more rapidly and more efficiently to the next virus or the next infectious agent. So I'm actually very excited about what's going on now, albeit in isolation.
Yeah, I agree. Not even just for the viruses that come in the future, but even the ones that come in the past. We're going to learn a lot about development but also distribution. And I mean, it's crazy that there's countries in the world that still don't have polio vaccine. So I'm hoping that all of this will, help us accept the technology needed to make these vaccines and get them out in the world. I think that's really exciting, and that's hopefully in the fairly near future.
Yeah, yeah. And then cancer, follows quickly after the infectious disease in terms of developing specific targeted agents against the genetic mutations that are represented in cancer. And I think that's coming along very rapidly as well. So that's another area that in health that I'm hopeful about.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, yeah.
So beyond healthcare, we talked a little bit about climate. Like I said, I love your big three. So what about food?
So food, nobody knows my address, so farmers will come after me. So I think that within 20 to 30 years, virtually all of our food, it'll be real food, but it'll be made through genomics and be made in large vats. And there's already ice cream available in California that is made by a company, I think it's called Perfect Day, where all of the milk proteins are made in large vats of yeast. And you have an ice cream that no part of it ever saw a cow. And you're going to be able to start creating new vegetables in labs or in hothouses that have all these specific characteristics you want. You want a head of lettuce that has a that has some protein in it, you can do it. Of course, it's all going to be, quote, genetically modified, but that's going to happen anyways. So I think there's going to be a massive change in what we eat, and it's largely going to be driven by climate change, because agriculture represents about 25 to 30% of all the energy we use and all the land we use. People talk about planting trees. Well, you can't plant trees in agriculture areas that you need to grow food. So huge changes coming.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's another potentially positive thing to come out of the pandemic, is that realization of how much we rely on global food supply. And I love the idea of not only being able to genetically edit a head of lettuce to make it more nutritious, but also to be able to maybe grow outside your own house, all year round. Hothouses probably will be required for mass production, but if we can genetically edit crops that can grow everywhere, we won't need to transport them all around the world. And it would make a huge difference to our climate. And
if your great grandmother were to go into Loblaws or Safeway today, maybe your great grandmother, she wouldn't be able to recognize any of the fruits and vegetables that are there.
Yeah.
So give me a break. We've been doing the genetic modification for many, many years now.
Yes. I mean, the idea that non-GMO foods are not modified in some way or crossbred or selectively bred is, that's something that it would be helpful if more people understood, for sure.
Yeah. And so agriculture alone is going to have to change because of the issues of climate change. And the climate change, well, I mean, it's atrocious that so many people in our society, bankers and business people and politicians, still believe that fossil fuels will have a part in the future. I mean, how can they believe that and see the fires in California and the floods in Louisiana, and the flooding in India and the drought in China? I mean, it's just absolutely crystal clear that these extreme events are caused by global warming, and we have to do something about it.
What do you think will be the first breakthrough in terms of applying synthetic biology to either energy production or fossil fuel cleanup or carbon cleanup, I guess?
So I think there are some really interesting microbes that can take carbon out of the air. And I think they'll be used in a whole bunch of construction entity situations where all of concrete that we use and a lot of other large-scale manufacturing will use carbon that's directly removed from the air. So I think that'll be one of the most important. And then there's the algae that are used to create biofuels. That's pretty simple, and there have already been some American military planes that have flown using biofuel from algae. That'll be exciting as well. But I don't think it's enough to simply stop global warming. I think it's progressed so far that we have to start really thinking about reversing it. So you're going to have to figure out how to start bringing net carbon out of the atmosphere, and planting trees, if you have the area, is also a good plan, although that's going to take quite a while.
So all of these things would go in conjunction with eliminating fossil fuels, as opposed to a way of keeping or allowing us to continue to burn them.
And getting rid of fossil fuels, if you think about what the Americans did during the Second World War, they put 45% of their GDP into winning the war in Europe. Think about what we're doing with COVID-19 now, trillions of dollars in the United States. If we used just half of that money, we can close down the fossil fuel industry and create solar energy, batteries, nuclear energy, wind, hydrogen. You just have to have the will. But I don't think the politicians and our industrial, people who have been feeding off fossil fuels are willing to go there yet.
Yes, people hold on to that status quo as tightly as they can.
Well, they're corporate. They're interested in their short-term profit and loss statements done on every 3 months, and they're not willing to be concerned about what's going to happen in 5 or 10 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, here's hoping.
So Yolanda, tell me what you think are going to be the two most important areas, developments coming out of genomics in the next 20 years in food and in health. What do you think?
We've kind of already touched on it, but I strongly think that, as you said, food is what's going to change the quickest, because there's no way we can keep producing food the way we are. And so as a vegetarian who tried to be vegan, I'm very excited about the ice cream that could be made in a vat somewhere. And I think we have to move to lab-based meats. And I know a lot of people who are meat eaters have trouble with that idea, but the price of meat is going to have to go up, and there's going to really be no choice. So the elimination of meat from the diet for sure, but with an alternative that's not just beans and the Beyond Meat things that we've been fed so far.
Yeah, that's so Western society, Canada, United States. The fact of the matter is there are billions of people, and I mean 3 to 4 billion people, who are starving for protein. Mm-hmm. Okay, and the best source of protein for them is pork and beef and dairy, and I don't think that's going to go away until we have a massive change in the security of our food supply.
And based on because I know it's been expensive what they've done so far, but as we've said, things are accelerating quickly, and I think as they scale up the production, it's going to become a very viable option.
Well, so the milk proteins done in California have already scaled up where the price is almost exactly the same as keeping a cow and and milking it. The meat production being done in California and in Israel, a few other places, it has some bigger scale-up issues. But all of technology has had scale-up issues.
Yeah.
That's just par for the course. Yeah.
So that's what I'm most excited about, or what I think will happen in the near future for food. In terms of health, I think, outside of what we talked about already with the vaccines, which I'm really optimistic that will have a huge impact on human health across the world. It might take a while to get it distributed and then have that trickle down to other vaccines, but I really hope that happens. But I think like very realistically, CRISPR is going to be used to cure single gene disorders in the very near future, at least some of them. You know, there's a lot of interesting work going on with blindness, different diseases that cause blindness. And I think that I'm excited for that as a previous genetic counselor it doesn't affect a lot of the population, but when you've sat with a family who's been affected by one of those devastating single gene disorders, muscular dystrophy, those kinds of things, I'm really up to, and it's not hard. Like some of the things we're talking about are maybe a little bit more complicated and maybe harder to get the public's on side with, but I think curing a single gene disorder should be relatively straightforward and should be something that society embraces.
Yeah, the one area that I'm not optimistic about in the short term are the devastating mental illnesses.
Yes.
The degenerative diseases. They're just so complicated. As an example, you know, they've now defined some of the genes associated with schizophrenia, but there's 600 of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so even if you have good CRISPR or similar gene editing, how are you going to do it? How are you going to figure out which genes that you're going to be able to modify? So, you know, addiction, depression, schizophrenia, those are going to, I'm afraid that those are going to be really tough, unless some breakthrough occurs.
Yeah, no, I agree. Even delivery, right? When you're talking about any of the mental illnesses, delivering these kind of therapeutics becomes very difficult.
Yeah. And, you know, I mean, CRISPR-Cas, and that's just the first. There are many other gene editing things coming across the laboratories now, and so they're going to be more and better, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think so. And I think we'll learn a lot from CRISPR-Cas9. But yeah, you're right. This is just the star of the show right now. There's lots of backup singers ready to go.
Yeah.
Well, how about I'll ask you the same questions and then we'll wrap it up about what you're the most excited about.
You know, I'm the most excited that I think we're going to make it. Okay, I mean, I actually, the doom and gloom, I think it's a hell of a lot worse than we realize. And I think the extreme weather events could cause amazing social unrest in the United States if insurance companies go broke and financial institutions go broke and people lose their 401s. I mean, that's terrible, you know. And of course the current COVID-19 pandemic is a good example. So my feeling is we're really in an existential crisis, but if we allow the scientists to do their thing in a respectable and responsible way, that there are exciting solutions across the board. And we're starting to see that with the quick vaccines.
Yeah, I agree. If that could be like the take-home message, trust the scientists.
Well, why not? You know, I mean, what is it about us that we have made some mistakes, to be fair, and we have to do better. We have to do better as a society. Yeah.
Yeah, but I also think you make this comment in your book, which I quite like, is that this depiction of Albert Einstein with his crazy hair. And, you know, I don't think that scientists are all crazy. And I also don't necessarily think it's a niche part of the population. I mean, I think there's a bit of scientist in all of us, right? So,
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, great, Yolanda, this has been great fun.
Yeah, I'm glad we got our technical issues figured out. And
we should do it again.
Yes, we should. Really nice to talk to you.
Okay. Likewise.
Take care.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.